Hello there. I'll use the microphone because I've got a small Scottish accent. So first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to the FT for looking after us, and I want to say thank you to the Engineer Better team for having me along here this evening. So I will just make sure you can see my slides, because otherwise that's no good. I don't want to PowerPoint you to death, because you do not want that. You will fall asleep, and with my accent as well, you will definitely fall asleep. So, a little bit about me. I should introduce myself. My name is Jen Stirrup. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn or Twitter or various strains of social media you might use. I've been implementing artificial intelligence and business intelligence solutions since 1997. Now, so that really means I've got almost 23 years of building these solutions, and I've seen a lot of failure and I've seen a lot of good things. So what I wanted to talk tonight was really about what I see organisations trying to make the value of their data. Now, I love data. I love being the person in the room who asks the really hard questions, and sometimes it's just good to try and make people think about their data, think about their ethics, and try and make the value of the data. We keep hearing we've all to be data driven and we've all to be insights driven, and it's all about the data. That's fine, but how many organisations actually take that to production? I spend time just thinking about it and not moving forward. I'm actually really looking forward to Simon's talk later this evening. I'm going to learn a lot from that and how we can move forward, hopefully with using our data as well. So what is DataOps? I've put the definition up here. This is Gartner's definition. Now, we all know the Gartner's famous quadrants, and lots of organisations will use that in order to choose the technology for right or for wrong. That's what they do. So Gartner are starting to define what it actually means. And for me, that's quite interesting, because it tells me the industry is starting to wake up a little bit to what they see DataOps is doing. Now, for many organisations who are swimming in Excel, it's interesting to me to think, well, how do you get them to move from that point where lots of organisations are to thinking about the data they actually generate and collect every day? How can you actually put a process in place that allows you to make the most of distributing that data to the people that need it? Because if you don't, they will go and shove all of their data in CSV files and use Excel, and they won't tell you about it until they make a mistake, and then it's your problem to fix it, because that's how the world works. So here's another definition from Data Science Central. I actually prefer this one because it talks about the different data tribes in the organisation. Because everyone is using data, and every organisation is data-based at heart. If they lose their data, they don't know who their customers are, their products, and they don't know their financial transactions. So actually the role of the DBA in these roles are actually more important as we become more data-driven. So I'm a big fan of business intelligence, and it's really about trying to make sure we can get people over the hurdles with their data. So I don't know how many people here use Microsoft technologies. That tends to be my area of expertise. I want to start off by saying that Microsoft don't always have a very good story for DataOps at the moment. They will in the future, but right now I'm trying to pick up organisations who've been using things like SQL Server and are asking, how do I actually test that my results are correct, other than eyeballing them? Which is really onerous, and it's what people tend to do. Does the number look right? And they don't always ask themselves very hard questions. So what I want to do is explain some of the things that I've been doing in different organisations to try and compare different technologies and what questions we asked ourselves. So I think I've got more questions about it than answers. I'm not going to give you a prescription, but what I want you to do is think about the questions that you could ask in your organisation, how you can start to think about these things a bit differently. Because the reality is every organisation has got data problems. If they say they don't have Excel everywhere, they're probably lying. They're not telling you because you will be prizing it out of their cold dead fingers, and that's just the way that it works. If it's not in their hard drives, it will be lurking in their email. I've got news for the industry. Microsoft Exchange is not a document information server. It's not designed for that, it's for email. But people do hide all of their spreadsheets and stuff in email, and that's what you landed with. And they then say, hey, we want to be data driven. And normally what I see is a manager who has half read a big data book over the weekend, has read the bit that says it's easy, but hasn't read the rest of it. And then he comes back down to your desk and says, right, I've been reading such and such, and you're now the data person. And then you're kind of stuck thinking, well, I was a DBA, I was a .NET developer, but suddenly I have to become data savvy all of a sudden and take all these problems and take them into something that's reproducible and a robust pipeline. So there's all sorts of issues. I think deployment issues is another one. If you use something like integration services, in SQL Server, it will deploy pipelines for you, but it's not really checking the data as you go along by default. And if you're a business intelligence person, the pipeline is getting you over the finish line, but what it's not doing is telling you, is my data correct? Now, people make all sorts of mistakes with data. I'm sure you've got some real war wounds yourself. I know I've got some. So just an example, one of my customers came to me with an Excel spreadsheet, because they said, this will tell you a lot about our organisation, and boy were they right, because they were calculating the median incorrectly. And I looked at it, and what they were doing was, they were saying that the median was the middle number of the column in Excel. And I was really confused. I had to go and check myself, what is the median? And as you know, it's just you take the numbers, they're in ascending order, you take the middle one, okay? If I could ask my 14-year-old son, he would tell me that. But what confused me was that they had just taken like column 1, cell 1 to 100 and picked out the middle number. And because it was column C, every time they changed the sort order of columns A or B, the median changed drastically. And I had to sit and look at it. I went for a walk and came back because I thought, I don't think I'm getting this right. And they're trying to be data driven. And I thought I had to go and break it to them that they weren't calculating the median. Anyway, so I asked them why they were doing that, and they said because we can't calculate the mean. And I thought, right. I've been in consultancy for 23 years. I've got a very good consultant's face, but this was really stretching it for me. I said, okay, so how long has that been going on for? Well, we tried to calculate the median for 2 years, and we've been going for this number because we couldn't calculate the mean. And I said, okay, so how long did that last for? And they said another 2 years. I said, okay, so for the last 4 years, you haven't been able to calculate the mean or the median. Is that kind of what you're saying? And he looked at me and he could suddenly see what I was thinking. And he hit his head. It's one of the few times in my life I've seen a customer hit themselves. And he said, yes, that's right. I said, okay. How much does this happen in your organisation? Is this the only spreadsheet, or are there others? I knew the answer before I asked. And he went pale and he hit himself again. And he said, it's everywhere. It's okay. So I was well worth my consulting fee that day, helping them to organise it. But the thing is, they then want to come back and they say, right, DataOps, we want to productionise our data. And I say, you have to check it's right first. Yes. And that's very hard because people are really embarrassed to admit they can't calculate the mean and the median. And that was just my second day. I will not bore you with the details of the other stuff I found, but it was wild. So the business cost is huge, because this was an organisation that was publicly throwing out data. And it was all wrong. It had been for years. The thing that really made me laugh was that they said that, well, it all made me laugh, but they said it was the length of time taken to solve legal cases. And the median, as it stood at that time, was 90 days. And when I fixed it, I got it down to 7 days. And then they sent me a newsletter to say that because of the hard work of the IT department, they reduced the length of time solving legal cases from 90 days down to 7. And this was an achievement for them. So I had a long way to go. And that's what you see as a consultant. I'm sure Simon's got whirlwinds as well, but that's some of mine. So the reality is, what happened there is they did not have any visibility of their data. Now, it's not that Excel itself is a problem. You could be using Google Sheets or CSV. It's just nobody thought to ask themselves, and nobody checked. And this is the thing where DataOps starts to come in. You're starting to ask yourself really hard questions about, is the data correct? And then you have to go and break it to someone that they are not calculating things properly. People get embarrassed because they don't know the calculations that they've been using to make business decisions on, and usually they've been there for years and they don't know. So Align's data as well is about trying to understand what is the business measuring. There's this thing by Peter Drucker, and he says in his book, if you don't, you can't manage it if you don't measure it. And you hear that, anyone who's done an MBA class will know that. It's actually more subtle than it sounds. If you read the rest of the chapter, which nobody does, they like the gifts with the, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it thing. It's more subtle than that. What he means is you measure what you care about. So if an organisation isn't measuring things like diversity and inclusion, for example, it's because they don't care about it. They're only focusing on what they think they need to know. It's about trying to work out, what do you care about? Only one of my customers has got data quality as a KPI at the board level, right? And the reason they're doing that is because they recognise the huge cost that dirty data was making to their organisations. It's a very, very brave company that does stuff like that. And they just felt, if we don't make this a criteria at the board level, we will never deal with it. What they were doing was, for every, if something like for every 10 new pieces of data they generated, 3 of them were wrong. So, and then it takes so long to try and clean all of that because the problem just gets worse. I think you'd be surprised how many organisations are in that. But people tend to see it being as a problem that sits in IT. It's a IT problem. Now, there is an effect in psychology called the bystander impact, the bystander effect. And it was actually coined after a murder, unfortunately. About 700 people witnessed the murder of a young woman called Kitty Genovese, and nobody called the police. And they were interviewed by psychologists, and they all said pretty much the same thing. I thought someone else would do it. You also get the bystander effect in data as well. It's always the business person's problem, or it's IT's problem. It's actually everybody's problem. And so we have data democratization. Now that's the marketing phrase. We hear a lot of that. Data democratization assumes that everyone has the ability to make the same decisions about their data as everyone else. That's not true. What they actually mean is data accessibility. People can access their data better, but not necessarily make the same decisions about it. You just have to look at the Facebook scandal recently to see that actually data democratization doesn't necessarily mean people get to make a decision about their data. So you do end up in a situation with a big ball of data mud. Nobody really knows or wants to untangle it. So the BI industry started to implement master data management systems. I don't know if anyone has tried to do this. They take a few years and it is painful because people can't decide on the glossary, they can't decide what the data means, they don't understand how to catalogue it. So actually as the industry we've kind of failed doing this as well. I'm sorry it's not more cheerful, but it's not always done very well. I've been trying to get organisations to do this, but they fall at the first hurdle because they just know that IT and the business are not going to want to talk to each other. So this is where DataOps starts to come in, because I think people are starting to give up on master data management system if they ever really started in the first place. So we start to see DataOps appearing. When we do some research in the history of it, we start to see it appearing when people are talking about marketing data. Because somebody told marketing they could be data driven. So they jumped in that and said, right, I want my customer data beside my weblogs, and I want it beside my CRM system, and I want it beside the sales system. And marketing started to ask IT for these things. And then they kept repeatedly asking for it. So interestingly enough, DataOps as a term is started to be used by marketing people rather than tech people first. I actually think that's right. Data should belong to the business as well. It's ultimately to drive the business forward. But then we also see IoT as well, as we start to generate data from devices. People want those tied up with their customer data as well. So suddenly we've got a huge onslaught of all this device data as well. So just a quick look at Google Trends for DataOps. We can see here a few blips. It starts to appear, but not very, very much. But then towards the right hand side, we start to see it appearing more prevalently. And the reason for that is all of the items that we see here. We're starting to see lots of customer data, lots of different sources, and people want repeatable, robust pipelines of making sure that the data is actually correct. So how do we do that? What's driving it all is really the value. People, as read, I don't know if you've seen The Great Hack, but in Netflix. If you have not seen it, I recommend that you do. It's all about the Facebook scandal, Cambridge Analytica, all of that scenario. If you haven't seen it, I thought it was really interesting. And in it, they say that the value of data last year surpassed the value of oil for the first time. Data itself is the most valuable asset on the planet. And that was a really interesting takeaway point. So organisations have got huge expectations. But it's turning into IT, how do you actually test it? I want to talk a little bit about some of the technologies and the ways that we explored in order to do that. I've been trying to organise this with different organisations. We get different findings at different places. And I thought what I want to do is just share some of those experiences and give you things to think about when you're doing this for yourself. So normally when we test software, you've got, I don't know how you do it, I tend to use more an agile approach. So what happens there is I sit with the users, I get the user story, and I turn that into a test. And the developers go off and develop it, and I have, for one developer, I have one tester, because I want to be sure that it's correct, and we can work that way. So then we have to think about data. The added component is actually the data correct. Let's go back to our friends with the mean and the median, right? Why was that not captured for 4 years? Because nobody checked and nobody thought to ask themselves the really hard questions. And when you start to look, you will find stuff like that. That day they thought I was super brainy. I really wasn't. I'm still not. It was more about asking the right questions, and I think that's where I'd like to help you to think about that. So normally when you set up a test in data, the standard tends to be this framework: arrange, act and assert. So it's about trying to split up the task. So we have arrange. You only have the code set up for that specific test, and that could be for a calculation, it could be for a calculated column or a metric, something like that. Is it correct? So at that point, we're trying to try and base these on what the users have defined in the story. What are they expecting to see? And it's important, I think, to set up these user stories and do it properly. I see people leaving those out because they don't want to talk to the business people usually, or they think they know what the business people want without asking them. I actually think that's quite a wrong approach to take. A lot of it comes to soft skills, I think, is communication and going and asking people. And a lot of it is humility, to go up and say, you know what, I just want to check that again. I know we talked about this before, but I just want to double check. And I don't see anything wrong with that, but I do see people struggling with that sense of, I don't want to ask again. I'm just going to go ahead and I'll tell them that's the right answer. So this is all people stuff as well. And I think people's the most important part of it. So the first thing we do is we have the code, and then we actually execute the code in order to try and work out, we're doing the test at this point, is it correct or isn't it? Is the next stage that happens, which is assert. And at that point, we're checking a box, or we come back to say, actually, this is not correct. There are different technologies that can help with this, and I'll come on to those. But really, at its fundamental, that's what we're trying to do. I want to work out how far away are we from the actual truth of what it is we're trying to do. I've worked in all sorts of systems, and the sort of ones I'm working on, I can't get them wrong. It can impact people's lives, and I just want to be absolutely sure I've done as much testing as possible before it leaves. I also think if you prepare up front, it's easier to mop up then than it is to mop up afterwards, which usually takes 10 times the amount of time and effort to do. So, okay, so we've got test code. What does the code actually look like? I remember looking at someone's code once, and they had put in variables like toppy1, toppy2, went up to toppy19. I had no idea what was going on. I still don't. I had to go back and ask them to rewrite it. I said, I can't test that. So off they went, not happy. But at least I could try and understand a bit better, because the code should still be good, even though it's test code and you're just writing a test. It has to be treated with respect, I think. So violating dry principles, so DIY, don't repeat yourself. I sometimes see that a lot. You know, it's 4 o'clock on a Friday, people want to go home and they just execute the same test again and again. No, I can see you. I know what you're doing. We have to move on to the next thing. So then, Yagni, you ain't going to need it. And also the single responsibility principle. I'm expecting the test to be almost molecular, testing one thing. So there is a DataOps manifesto. There's a few leadership principles which I'll race through. I'm conscious of time. So what we're trying to do is establish the progress and the performance as we go along. Now, what that allows you to do is work out bottlenecks in the system as well, to look at your code and say it's a stored procedure or something like that. Why is it taking a long time to run? I saw one example where it was a website that was pulling data or content from a SQL server behind the scenes. And although it looks like it was working, because the stored procedure ran, the data itself was supposed to return just one row of code, which depended on other things around it on the web page. But they never wrote the where clause properly, so the query that should have brought back one cell of data actually brought back 6 million rows of data every time somebody hit the website. So it wasn't just that the stored procedure ran and SQL Server wasn't happy, but it did it. It was producing just the wrong results. And sometimes people need to think about what it is they're doing. So I had to go and explain to the developers what a where clause was. And it was just like one of the most weird days. But I got there and it turned out they were using .NET, but one of these ORM tools that writes the code for you. And it wasn't a good day. But I got there in the end. And explain the beauty of what a filter looks like. But the thing is, everybody blames the database. Oh, SQL Server's rubbish. It's not doing what we think it's going to do. I hear that a lot. And then I say, well, let's look at the queries and look at the sheer stupidity of what you're actually asking it to do. And then we can think about where the stupidity lies. And usually the SQL Server is easy to solve, right? Because I can optimize that. But producing 6 million of rows, hundreds of thousands of times a day, it's going to not work. So I'm trying to work out the progress and performance measurements. If something is taking longer than it should, it's probably something like that no one's going to admit to. So I would go and eyeball that. So data and metadata. So I have to try and understand what the data is about the data. In data science, we often forget about this. What does the data actually mean? I did some work for one of the city councils in London, and there was a junior data scientist who joined us, and much to her delight, I'm sure, I asked her to go and catalogue one of the source systems, and it took her 3 months. I'm amazed she's still talking to me. But at the end of the 3 months, we had a beautiful data catalogue. We understood all the metadata, and she was incredibly useful because she was the only person who understood the data. But because of the metadata, that really meant we understood better what we could measure and what we could think about. Because people expect magic numbers to appear, and they can just throw numbers at a wall and do whatever the numbers say. But if you don't know what the columns mean, it's not going to work very well. So Tower of Babel, it's just like a meaningless chatter. You're never going to be able to get people to talk to one another until we do that. Now it sounds boring, but actually it's one of the most useful things you can ask people to do. Right, use your common sense. I know this sounds like really obvious, but I've just given you some examples where people have not used their common sense for 4 years and nobody's ever raised it. And I think what happens is that I think people can regress to the mean almost. If nobody asks, then they won't do it either. And it actually pulls everybody down. So I'm the awkward person that goes in and asks the awkward and probably quite dumb questions. But sometimes you need someone like that just to go in and ask things and say, well, what does this mean? Why is it like that? Okay, automate as much as you can. It sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how many organisations that I go into, they don't want to automate. People are happy in their Excel spreadsheets, and the last person they usually want to see is me. And the last thing I want to find is a bunch of access everywhere as well, because that appears as well. And it's not the technology, it's been built for an ad hoc solution. But who's testing the data? Probably nobody. Automating means that it just saves people's time and it increases their productivity. People sometimes think they will lose their jobs if they give away data and automate stuff. I actually find in my experience that's not true. The more data you give away and the more understanding of the data you give away, the more people want it, right? And you just end up being more busy than they were before, even though you've automated stuff. Because people can't get enough data, they can't get enough of it. No one ever said, you know what? I get enough reports now, I don't need any more. It doesn't work like that. No one ever said that. So building for bottlenecks, so this can often be a more technical thing. People starting to think about what's the performance of the machines look like. I once saved an organisation £3 million. They were going to buy a particular big data database because they felt they needed it, but I just went in and did some optimization work on one of their servers. I knew they hadn't looked at it for a while because they suddenly couldn't find the password to the machine, and I thought, well, okay, that kind of is a giveaway that they haven't even cracked it open and logged in for a while. Things like that are not good, but that's where we kind of are. So leadership principles, so a sense of discipline as well. I'm glad to see that in Microsoft Power BI they've started to do some data lineage now. Where does the data come from? I've also seen some other solutions. One company called ASG, they do a lovely data lineage solution that gives you the quality of the data as well. And I think companies, for me, the main takeaway point is that companies are starting to think about where the data comes from. With GDPR, I think they've started to think about being adults with their data and other people's data, because as an industry we haven't been adults with people's data, which is why we've started to get into these issues that we see all the time. Every week there's another data breach, and every week it disappears back out the news again because there's another one the next week, and we just seem to go round in circles with it the whole time. Transparency is about trying to understand where the data actually goes, and one of my customers had asked me where Excel goes when someone emails it out, and I said, well, it goes wherever you emailed it to. Can we track it? No. Right. And it turned out that they got themselves into quite a lot of trouble. They had rented some Excel data from our marketing firm, and somebody somewhere had sent it to someone in another department, and then it made its way around the building. Other people thought, oh, that's handy, I'll use that. So that's the kind of thing that happens. But then it ended up on the company's website. So the first lawyer's letter said, get that data you rented from us off your website. It's not for public consumption, you've broken the law. The second lawyer's letter said, get it off all the desktops apart from the department that's actually rented it. The third lawyer's letter said, get it out of your SQL server because people were importing into databases and using it there. And the fourth lawyer's letter said, get it out of all of your backups, out of your data centres, out your data centres, because it was running up and down the country, and it was only one Excel spreadsheet and one Excel table caused huge havoc, but it was the processes in place that really allowed that to happen. So it's about transparency, and I think organisations quite like things like Office 365 and Google spreadsheets, because at least it's in the cloud. You know that people are not moving it around all the place all the time. So I'm conscious of time, I just wanted to, if you're thinking about SQL Server and automating data, I'll just give you some names to throw out. The first two are free and open source. So there's something to go and think about if you're interested in how do you automate this. If you're a .NET developer and you're using SQL Server. Sentry One is a paid for solution. I'm not here to sell you anything. I just put it up to say that people are starting to look at this. So NBI is open source, and if you're interested you can go and download it. I found when we started to use it, it's actually it's only got 4 committers on the open source repository, and only one of those is active. So he better not leave his bedroom or anything, because I think organisations would not be very happy if something happens to him. But personally, when I'm trying to design an enterprise framework, I worry about that, because I think I want to see more action on the open source repositories, because that worries me. I don't like dependencies like that. So it's an open source framework, and it helps you to validate data quality. You write your tests. And the other one which is also free and open source is tSQLt. I see this one much more commonly, and it's an open source framework which is written in SQL. So what I try and do is insulate those tests, and the tests are run within the transactions. So you've got tests as an independent module, and it's good you can start to group them together, because you should ideally have more than one test. So it's good because you can generate it in plain SQL or XML, and it's interesting, you can isolate the code, as it says here, with fake tables and views. It's allowing you to do things on the fly. So I tend to see this one more. It's got way more committers on the open source framework, and I'm a bit happier with that. So it's also interesting because you don't have to switch between various tools, which I do see sometimes people having to do that. So it's 7:30, so I'm just conscious of time. So just a quick summary, that's just a few ideas. If you're thinking about data quality using SQL Server, there will be other technologies for other databases, not just these ones. But I thought I'd mention a few to say the industry is starting to catch up with where open source is. And I think the open source teams have been thinking about this for some time. So we do have some solutions out there. And I think it takes a brave person to try and implement it. So if you do that, good luck. Hopefully this has helped you think a wee bit more about some of the questions you can ask yourself in your own organisations. And with that, I will hand back to Dan.
Does anyone have any questions for Jen? We got a bit of time for Q&A. We're not that super tight on time. So if you've got a question, feel free to ask it now. Yeah, I'll come around with the mic.
So I'm going to get Rick.
Thanks, that was really, really fascinating. I kind of want to hear an inspiring success story. So what is the biggest transformation you've seen an organisation make with their data, and what does it look like? What does good look like at the end?
I'll just shout, or can I use the microphone again?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'll come and get it.
I'll do some running around.
Thank you, that's it. So I've actually just finished a big project. So I've done this for a few places, but the one I've organised or just done is a university. They haven't allowed me to say who they are, so if it's all right, we'll just leave it at that. When I started with them, they'd never done Agile before, and they had never looked at Microsoft technologies before. They had what you might politely call a heritage system, so it's legacy, and yeah, it's polite, isn't it? So they had this, what I called heritage. They bought that. That was the main thing. I was happy. So I maybe took them through too much change all at once, because I said, right, the legacy system, I'm sure you love it and it's fantastic, but we're going to do something else because that is out of date, and honestly if you reboot it I'm not sure it's going to come up. It's quite an old system. I had a separate customer who actually IBM told them, if you reboot that we can't guarantee it's going to come up, and that's why I implemented SQL Server. But with that organisation I had to do a lot of change because I had to explain to people, really it's all people stuff, we're going to use new technology, here's why, because we need to reduce license costs for business objects, so we're going to go with Microsoft Power BI because it's kind of free. You do get paid versions, so I managed to move some of them onto paid versions. And then I looked at the data and I just thought, I don't understand any of this. So I did like a data quality assessment, just a quick one. And I tried to look at how much data is missing, how many nulls have they got, do they have a data dictionary, and then I realised the data was not good because the processes on their systems had not been implemented properly, and the data just follows the process. So I couldn't persuade them to fix the data, but I did convince them to upgrade one of the systems, so I was happy with that, and get a consultant in who would give them better processes and give them better data. So that took about 6 months. The other thing I found was I could start to really talk about these because it was Microsoft. We did an evaluation of NBI, tSQLt, and we also did an evaluation of the PACE software as well. Because what I wanted to do is give them, they'd gone from not having a testing department to doing test-driven development, doing Agile, thinking about user stories, and it was just all about trying to prove small successes at a time. I'd say, right, we're just going to implement one user story this week. That's all we're going to, this sprint, that's all we're going to do. And when I started to get one right, and then say, right, we'll do two next time. And just very gently, incrementally go through the process. I think it was successful because I could start to highlight issues in the data and highlight the fact that they needed to do better. They'd never been understood that before. So I don't know if that answers your question. We did a big assessment between these three tools and we evaluated them on how much time it would take to develop in them. We didn't go with NBI because I was worried about it's a big enterprise with a lot of data. Having one committer in an open source project wasn't good. So they're still thinking about tSQLt and the paid one. It's a balance between roll your own and cost, I think. And it's how people measure that. I always think cost itself, productivity is a cost. Is a cost if people have to stay back late at night to do stuff. Just because the boss doesn't feel that cost doesn't mean it's not a cost, and I don't want to encourage that. So that was a bit of a payoff. But it's good because at least I could try and work with the business. That was the other thing as well, to work with the business and get them to talk to one another and say, this is what good looks like. But getting a definition of what good looks like was really starting first with what the business people wanted. They wanted a change. They didn't want to be using old heritage systems. They'd been using Tableau and Power BI, other organisations, and then had joined the university and were just holding their hands up saying, you know, we don't want to use old stuff anymore. We can't go back. I don't know if that answers the question. I could talk about that all night because it's quite a long project. That's for you. Sorry.
Any other quick questions before we move on to the game? So, okay, cool.
Sorry, this is probably quite a naive question, but how do you measure data quality?
All right, I could talk all about that. Sorry, I'll take that. So the way that I look at it, and I don't, maybe if I get a chance later I can put my slides up in LinkedIn or something, but I try and look at it, I call it the 8 C's, and I got this from a book I was reading all about HR data, which sounds really boring, but this guy came up with this framework and I thought, that's it. How do you translate data quality into something that people can understand? Because if you say to a data person, I would say to a business person, a high percentage of nulls there, they fall asleep, right? There's a grey fog that will descend in their brains. They're not listening, okay? But if you say to them, actually, you know that we have to spend for every 10 pieces of data you generate, 3 of them are wrong, and you've had to hire people to clean up those 3 bits of data, then suddenly it becomes an issue. Because you think, hang on a minute, we're not utilising our resources properly, and you have to think about productivity. So I look at it in terms of, just to throw a few out there, currency. How current is the data? Because business people will look at out-of-date data and say that it's wrong, it's bad data. It's not wrong, it's just out of date and it needs to be refreshed better. The other one I would look at is consistency. I once did a data warehouse for someone and they had, for male and female, they had over 300 different definitions, and that was without looking at, transgender or binary or fluid definitions of gender. That was only male and female, 300. And I just thought, how do you do that? That's a unique sort of creativity. And you should have seen what they did with phone number. It was wow, that's crazy. So I do try and give them an idea of consistency. See, look, if you want to do male, female, trans, rather not say, just of the 4, that's fine. But then we have to find in the ETL process a way of swapping those around. So I do that. I found, I did try and use some different technologies to clean up the data, but I still think that can be really expensive if you want to buy stuff. So people tend up rolling their own. And that's really hard. I've just finished doing an application for an organisation quite near here, very dirty data, and we managed, when I did a first assessment of customer names, only 15% of them were correct. If you think of, say it's a business to business, you've got Marks and Spencer's, right? You get Marks and Spencer's, M&S all rolled up into one, Marks and Sparks. And then you've got the different branches, right? So suddenly Marks and Spencer's, one company, rolls up to a huge number. So it's about these alignment, but at least you can go in and say, are you talking 200 stores or do you want to amalgamate these so you've got one number? And I think that for me becomes a user story, which I can start to change and test and work the way through. Does that help? But I could talk a lot about that. Is that all right?